Well, it may have taken him a few months longer, but Finance Minister Joe Oliver delivered on the promise today that will let the Conservatives go into this fall's election saying they have balanced the budget, but not by much. And the opposition says he did it by making the wrong choices. But Oliver clearly had the support of the boss.
Best first-time budget ever by a finance minister.
The surplus this year, just over $1 billion. But to what end? How did they get there? There's a far smaller contingency fund now, and much of the newly promised spending is backloaded. That is, won't kick in for a few years, effectively letting the Conservatives say, vote for us and we will deliver. Will it work? We have extensive coverage, beginning with senior correspondent Terry Milewski in Ottawa. Terry.
Well, Peter, job one for Joe Oliver was to make sure the Conservatives get to campaign on a balanced budget. And as you say, he made it, but just barely. First, he had to raid the contingency fund, taking $2 billion out of the $3 billion set aside for emergencies. Then he delayed billions in new promises far into the future.
This budget is balanced.
That is what the Conservatives came to hear. But getting to balance was not easy. The minister promises a very modest surplus of just $1.4 billion this year. That's a tiny fraction of the $300 billion federal budget. And the surpluses are still small even in later years. The reason being that revenues will drop because of all the tax cuts.
We will increase the TFSA annual contribution limit from the current $5,500 to $10,000.
Still, Oliver is spreading the impact of his plan over many years. The small business tax will be cut from 11% to 9%, but not until 2019. And there's a $1 billion fund for transit, but it won't reach that level until 2019. There's also a huge promise of $12 billion extra for defense, but again, not yet. None of it comes this year, and next year, zero again. The first thin slice only begins in 2017, and the rest is spread over 10 years. Some of the tax cuts, though, add up fast. The so-called family tax cut, the income splitting announced last fall, plus the universal childcare benefit, which sends monthly checks to parents, will together take $7.8 billion out of government revenues. There is also a break on EI so that people can take 6 months, not 6 weeks, to care for a sick loved one. And seniors will get a tax break for making their homes more accessible. Then there is new spending, $320 million for the war in Iraq and Syria, $293 million for counterterrorism at home, and $60 million to beef up security on Parliament Hill. No wonder the contingency fund had to be slashed from $3 billion to $1 billion.
The contingency fund, as the parliamentary budget officer said very recently, is there for real emergencies. That's why it's called a contingency fund. It's not something that you tap into on budget day because you're missing a couple of $1 billion.
Both the NDP and the Liberals said the budget favors the wealthy.
This budget helps those who need it least. There is nothing in here for the middle class and those hoping to join it, and there's no plan for jobs and growth. We will not be supporting this budget.
But that's the point. The Conservatives don't want the opposition to support the budget. They want to be able to point at the NDP and the Liberals and say, those guys are against tax cuts and balanced budgets. Then the opposition will point back and say, those guys are just helping the rich. So it is an election budget, all right, but for both sides of the aisle, Peter.
All right, Terry. Thank you. Terry Milewski in Ottawa.